Hey, what's up? It's Jesco again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. Let's do another YouTube questions and knowledge bomb video. This is the segment where I answer your questions from the YouTube comments because I just don't get in there enough and I feel a bit guilty. So this is my way of giving back to all of you commenting and watching my videos. I really appreciate it. But before we get into that, I want to help you out with my home studio treatment framework. These are my 5 steps to systematically treating a room and getting it to translate. It's a very top-level perspective on the approach, the strategy that I recommend you follow when treating your home studio from start to finish, from basically starting with an empty room, setting up your speakers, finding your listening position, all the way through to fine-tuning with speaker equalization. They're all in there, all the steps that you need to take. And the most important part of this is in the right order, in a sequence where each of these steps builds on the one before, because it's so easy to end up turning in circles when you're treating your home studio because you do something that you find necessary and probably is necessary, but you maybe forgot to do something important that had to come before in order to not end up turning in circles. I really want that to not be you. I want you to have a strategy, a process that you can follow step by step. So make sure to download my home studio treatment framework that you can get completely for free at the link in the description and actually move through this process of treating your home studio, knowing what you need to focus on at each step and what to ignore. So if that's you and you're in the process of treating your home studio, or you're just starting out and you want a path that you can follow, make sure you download the home studio treatment framework at the link in the description. With that, let's get to our YouTube questions. And this first one is from Jose Feldvedek, I guess, on the interview that I did with Carl Tatz called Room Treatment versus Speaker Tuning. Carl Tatz reveals what matters most. And Jose says, "Hey Jesco, this video was really informative and a joy to watch and listen to. It raised a question in me though. What is more important in a home studio setting, the perfect phantom center or the flattest bass response? Because if you successfully found where the flattest bass response is, that spot may not be ideal for creating the phantom center. For example, if you cannot treat the first reflection points, what do you suggest?" Thanks. So good question. The important thing here is that they're both really important, right? The phantom center and a proper sound stage is probably more important, but you still need a balanced bass response as well. You need both. And that's why the Phantom Speaker Test workshop that you can also sign up for free on my website guides you through finding both and getting both. And the thing here to understand is if you find your low-end sweet spot in your room, you will be able to set up your speakers to get a proper phantom center and a proper sound stage, a proper stereo field, basically. Yeah, you won't end up having to sit right up against a wall, as in within like a foot or 30 centimeters. That's not going to happen. The low-end sweet spot is always going to be in a spot in your room that will give you enough space to set up a proper stereo triangle. Granted, and that is also important, in a small room, and in particular in kind of cuboid rooms, that might be very close to a wall, not within a foot, but maybe within 3 feet, about a meter. That is very common. And that means that you can only also end up with a very small stereo triangle because you have to sit so close to the wall. But that is the compromise that you have to make, unfortunately. Yeah. You will still be able to get a proper stereo triangle, but it's going to be very small. And there's no way around this, unfortunately. This is the only way you can get a proper listening position that both has a balanced bass response and a proper stereo soundstage. Yeah. So don't think that you somehow will end up finding your low-end sweet spot crouched into a corner. That's not going to happen. In all cases, you will be able to find a low-end sweet spot that will still allow you to also get a proper stereo setup, a proper stereo triangle, a proper soundstage and phantom center. Yeah, but good question. Moving on to the next one. So this is from, well, I can't really pronounce the name, on the video called You're Doing the Clap Test Wrong, How to Remove Flutter Echo. I guess this question doesn't actually relate to anything in the video, but he says, okay, Jesco, what's the trick here? You started the video with a clap test and your room sounds as reverberant as it looks like it would be based on the camera angle you use. However, there's absolutely no reverb or echo in the narration recording. You're obviously not close micing this. Do you use a de-reverb plugin when processing your audio? What's your secret? Yeah, well spotted. So if you remember back a while ago, I used to use a Rode NT1A microphone that was positioned basically right here. And it was on an arm that I had to always pull out for the videos. It was kind of annoying. It sounded fantastic, but it used up a lot of space and I always had to pull it out. And I wanted to find a solution that I didn't have to basically adjust every time I record a video. So I looked at directional microphones. I tried the Rode NT5, I think that's what it's called. I didn't really like the sound of that. And so now I'm using a Sennheiser MKE 600, which is right here. It's probably about just under a meter away from me. And so there's actually, even with its, is it supercardioid, hypercardioid even, I'm not sure, pickup pattern, there's still quite a bit of reverb on it just because it's so far away from my mouth. And so basically I use studio sound in the editor. It's called Descript, and it's some AI thing, and you just kind of slap it on. I set it to about 70%. Let me give you a test of what it sounds like without using studio sound. So this is a test just using the recording as is. Yeah, so this is what it sounds like if I do not apply the studio sound. And now here it is again with studio sound switched on and set to about 70%. The reason I do this simply is because how well you can understand my voice, to me, is the most important part of recording these videos. And I really liked the sound of the NT1A, and I just couldn't get the same rejection, obviously the same sound with that little room in the recording. And so because it's so easy to use, I just kind of ended up slapping that on with every video because it's literally one click. But yeah, that's kind of the difference. That's what I'm doing. If you don't like it, let me know. If you don't care, let me know. I don't really mind either way. If you want me to, from now on, record my videos without this studio sound applied, that's totally fine with me. Yeah, let me know and I'll see from the reaction if it's worth me making a change in this perspective, aka not pressing that button when I edit my video. But yeah, that's that's what's happening there. Moving on, this is a question from Madon Machines on a video called DIY Bass Traps, Low versus High Density Insulation. Stop wasting your money. And he asks, how do you convert kilogram per meter cubes to Pascal seconds per meters? For example, RWA 45 kilograms per meter cubed to Pascal seconds per meter. There is no direct way to convert from one to the other in a mathematical way. There is no direct mathematical relationship between the two. You also have to make sure that you're looking at the right unit. When we're looking at gas flow resistivity, independent of the depth of the material, it's actually Pascal seconds per meter squared. Yeah, so there's a difference there. The important point is that using kilograms per meter cubed is a simplification that I recommend people do in order not to get too hung up on the gas flow resistivity numbers, because ideally what you want is to have those numbers, but in many cases, products that are perfectly usable for absorption don't actually show that number in the data sheet, just because to the company producing this material, it's not important. And so the unit weight measured in kilograms per meter cubed is more common. Still not every material shows this data, but it's more common than gas flow resistivity. And so if you basically plot all the different materials where you have both numbers available, there's a certain trend. It's not perfect, but there's a certain trend that you can see, and that allows us to make a kind of conversion from one to the other. It's very rough. It's not accurate by any means, and that's not the point. The point is to simplify the process of selecting a suitable material. So we're looking at RWA 45 kilograms per meter cubed. That's rather dense. I'm not entirely sure where that sits. I have the number somewhere, but it's probably around the 10,000 Pascal seconds per meter cubed, per meter squared, sorry. Maybe it's slightly higher than that, somewhere around that. Good question though. Moving on. So this one is from AS Engineer 4594. Gotta love YouTube names. On a video called $100 to $100,000, what you get for your acoustic treatment budget. And he asks, at Acoustics Insider, I wonder how you would rate the room we can see in this video. So obviously this is my room. This is the one that I worked in professionally as a mix engineer for about 10 years. Now that's kind of back to being a hobby more than anything else. How do I rate this room? I would probably give it somewhere between 7 to 8 out of 10. So it's not perfect by any means. It's good enough. That's the important thing. I just mixed a record here 2 days ago, and I have absolutely no problem hearing everything that I need to. It works perfectly fine. It's absolutely good enough for me to do what I need to do. And so, that's kind of where I would rate that. The thing that I really like about the room is how it feels. So it's a very comfortable room to be in. And that's kind of the feedback that I get from everybody visiting as well. The amount of absorption versus reflected energy gives a very pleasant, open atmosphere in this room. It's very quiet. It's a very pleasant room to be in, and I really like being here and working here as well. So that's kind of how I would rate this, somewhere between a 7 to 8 out of 10. This next question is from Squash Beats ZW on a video called Subwoofers #2, how to place your sub correctly in a home studio. This is one of the videos that I did back with Head Audio about 3 years ago, was it? And he says, thank you for sharing. What's your advice on decoupling subs using solutions like Acoustics ISO 200 sub? So my general perspective on decoupling has not changed. It is still the same as it is in the video that I did with Head as well. I'll link that in the card right now. And the point being, in a nutshell, is that it's very hard to actually say whether these products actually do anything useful. Some people swear on them, others completely ignore them. I say, if you have your main speakers, and this obviously I'll talk about subs in a second, if you have your speakers on separate stands, you don't need to bother with decoupling. If you have your speakers on your desk, might as well. And more importantly, to get them at the right height, and you might as well use a decoupling solutions for that. Pay what you are willing to pay for a decoupling solution. In my opinion, nothing's changed. The verdict isn't out yet on whether these products are useful or not. One thing to definitely say, though, is that even if they make a difference, it is very small. And in the grand scheme of things, it's just not that important. There are many things that you can do that are much easier, that are way more impactful on the sound that you're getting, and most importantly on tailoring the sound in a way that actually allows you to mix better. One of them very simply being getting your stereo setup right, finding your listening position, finding your low end sweet spot. I keep talking about it. It's one of the main things you can do, but then also just treatment on top of that. So even if it works, the difference is small. And so if it's worth it or not is really up to you to decide. Talking about subs, so I actually have the ISO 200 sub by Acoustics underneath my sub, which is right down there. And the main reason that I use it is back in the days when I bought it, I didn't really know any better. And it fits perfectly under my Adam Sub 12, which has the port on the bottom of the unit. And so it gives enough space for the port to work properly. And that's kind of why it works for me. Moving on to the next question. This one is by Soldat D3R. Soldater. This one is called Why Mixing at Low Volume Does Not Remove Your Room, but you still should. So he asks, hello Jesco, thank you so much for the video. You're very welcome. One question, what do you think about Dan Worrell suggesting that we should use sleek EQ GE with the equal loudness curve when monitoring at lower volumes? Okay, interesting question. I haven't seen him talk about this. Much respect for Dan Worrell. I love his videos. I think his approach is great. Yeah, nothing but recommendations from my side on his videos. So I guess the idea here is to compensate for the change in the frequency response of your hearing apparatus by using this EQ. I would say, so first of all, for me, there's a certain benefit that comes from this change in the frequency response of your hearing apparatus at lower volumes, and that is that your perception changes in a way that emphasizes transients, dynamic behavior. And I find that quite useful. So there is something to say about working with your hearing apparatus instead of working against it, as in not knowing what is going on. But if you know what's going on, you can use that to your advantage. That said, if you strictly adhere to using such a equal loudness curve compensation, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to work with that either, right? So the point is you have to understand how your hearing changes, and more importantly, you have to be very familiar with it. You can really only start trusting your hearing when you really know the changes that are happening, not just from a logical perspective, but from an experience perspective. You have accustomed to these changes. And it's one of the reasons why I recommend, if you use EQ, room correction, speaker calibration systems, to not switch them off. Set them up and then just forget about them, because this is now your new standard. And I would say it's the same here. If you use one of these EQs, make it your standard and then learn, give yourself time to learn what it sounds like, and you should be able to work fine. Yeah, let's leave it at that for now. Yeah? Good question. So another one by Victor Nova on my top 5 bass trap placement mistakes and how to fix them. And he says, okay, now you got me thinking. I have a null at 120 hertz, 300 hertz, and 500 hertz that I can't seem to get rid of no matter where I place my treatment, and I have kind of a lot of it. Going back to look at the air gap now, I had no idea messing up the air gap size could result in these weird mid issues. We'll report back soon. So I'm glad you pointed this out. There's a mistake in your thinking here, right? The air gap mismatch creates inconsistencies in the absorption coefficient, not in the frequency response, right? So there are now, if you mess up the air gap size, you end up having a higher absorption coefficient followed by a lower absorption coefficient. And that just means that you're absorbing less or more energy, but that doesn't directly translate into those same frequencies giving you peaks and dips in the frequency response. Those are not related directly. Yeah, the peaks and dips in the frequency response are caused by acoustic distortions, right? So obviously standing waves in the low frequencies, and then different types of reflections going further up the spectrum. So this inconsistency in absorption doesn't cause peaks and dips in the frequency response. Those are caused by reflections, the comb filters that are getting create interference patterns through reflections and standing waves. Yeah. So if you've got nulls, 120 hertz, 300 hertz, 500 hertz, those are actually somewhat above the range that is typically affected by standing waves, by room mode. So what you're probably dealing with is reflection issues. Yeah. So that's what you need to look at. All right. Good question though. Good for pointing that out and allowing me to clarify that. So this one is by Cadmium Music on the video called Struggling with Low End in a Non-Rectangular Room, and here's how to fix it. And he says, I have a pair of Adam A8Hs which come with A control, which has the ability to time delay each speaker. Is there a way to using REW to check and tweak the alignment of the Adams with my separate subwoofer? Yes, there is, but it's actually pretty complicated. REW, funnily enough, is not the greatest tool, the best tool to use for aligning subwoofers with speakers or satellites, because what you want is a continuous way to measure both the frequency and the phase response. And the way to do that is to use a tool like Smart or Open Sound Meter, which is a free tool to use. I'll put a link in the description as well, opensoundmeter.com, I believe. And that allows you to basically measure in real time the frequency and time response of a speaker, of a system, and then see what happens as you adjust certain parameters, like, for example, the time delay. Yeah. So you can do the same thing with REW, but it's actually trickier to do because you can't measure in real time. Yeah. Also, the time delay compensation REW, in my opinion, isn't as straightforward as it is in a real-time measurement software like Smart or Open Sound Meter. Yeah. But so yeah, have a look at that. And this is something that I'm working on. Yeah. So one of the courses that it will eventually happen is a subwoofer integration guide, and that will, from what I'm thinking about now, will probably involve showing you how to use Open Sound Meter in order to do this properly. Yeah. Good question. This next one is by Patrick Bell Q6X on a video called Acoustic Panel Placement. Do you need an air gap behind your panels? And he says, I've just found your channel and this excellent video on the subject. Thank you. Welcome. I have a question, which is I'm about to install sidewall panels and I'm trying to figure out the first and second reflection points. I've heard a lot about using the mirror trick. Is this something you would recommend, or would you have another suggestion? Nope. That's a great way to do this. Don't bother with second reflection points. If you get your first reflection points treated right, there will probably be no second reflection points. Yeah, so focus on those first. In a home studio in particular, that's what's important. Yeah, so yeah, and the mirror trick works just fine. Yeah, so everybody watching who hasn't heard about this, this is basically the idea that the reflection pattern from a speaker to your ear is the same as playing pool, playing billiards on that plane between your speaker and your ear. Yeah, so if you think about, for example, my left speaker, there's a wall on my left side, or actually let's take the left speaker and the wall on my right side. Yeah, there will be a spot if you hold a mirror on the wall on that plane. If you hold the mirror there on the wall, there will be a spot somewhere on the wall where if I look at the mirror, I can see the speaker in the reflection of the mirror. So that's the point that light follows and reflects off of to get to my ear, and sound will follow that same path. Again, just like playing billiards, playing pool, inbound angle equals outbound angle is kind of the idea here. And so if you place your absorption around that spot, then you will most likely also hit that or you will be able to stop that reflection from happening. Yeah, so that's the idea. You want to do that all around to figure out the mirror reflection points around your setup, and that will allow you to get rid of early reflections, which are some of the most problematic when we're talking about both the frequency response and also detail in your stereo image, yeah, because they mess up the perception of stereo, of pinpointing sources in the stereo field, And so getting rid of those will actually clean up your stereo field and also, to some extent, flatten out your frequency response. Good question. Moving on. This one is from Tim Sarlos 6403 on another knowledge bomb video that I did, number 11. And he says, so this one is a long one. Let's see if I can figure this out. I have a question concerning the low cut topic at the beginning of the video. My speakers are flat until I hit the 30 hertz mark. All right, big speakers. I have a huge null at 24 hertz and a huge peak at about 36 hertz. Now the thing is, I can select different cutoff filters on the back of the speakers, 24, 32, 40, etc. The 24 setting gives me the peak at 36 hertz and also a huge peak at 16 hertz. The 32 setting, on the other hand, lowers the 16 hertz peak significantly, but the 36 hertz peak is still there. Now, what's my question? I can set the cutoff to 40 hertz, and that makes the room response flat to about 32 hertz, with minimal 36 hertz bump and almost nothing below 30 hertz. Feels a bit like a cheap trick to set the cutoff at 40 hertz. What are your thoughts on this matter? And just to clarify, no matter where I set my filter, because of the 24 hertz null, there isn't much going on below 30 hertz, except some sub-rumble that makes my kitchen inventory sing along. Hope that's totally confusing. Grüße aus Dresden, Grüße zurück. I don't think this is a cheap trick at all. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's obviously you're not doing the ideal, but you're compensating the effect of the room by setting the low frequency cutoff of your speaker. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't do that. Yeah, if you're not getting any energy below 30 hertz anyway, until you do some treatment for a 24 hertz standing wave, which is probably not going to happen. Why not follow this path? Yeah, it's I mean, speaker equalization does the exact same thing, right? Speaker calibration systems, they're compensating for the effect that is present in your room with your speakers in the way that they are set up. Yeah, and this is just the same thing, but using a low cut filter instead of a parametric booster cut. Yeah, so I don't see any reason why you shouldn't do this. Yeah. Good question. Definitely keep doing that, and go for it. Here's a one from the Vidman5 on Home Studio Acoustics. My room is asymmetrical. Should I fix it? Hi, Jesco. Your bass hunter technique really saved the day. Sweet. I'm glad to hear that. It is a very powerful technique. So I'm very glad to hear that. I recently moved into a new house, and the room I'm using is very irregular with many angles. When I installed my Yamaha HS8, I thought I had a completely new speaker in a bad way. No bass, mids completely clouded, I really couldn't tell what I was listening to. After moving the table 2 different times, I tried your technique and I found a spot that actually sounds good with good bass and mids. I now have it marked and measured for future reference if need be. Very much appreciated. Great. Obviously not a question here, but I just wanted to highlight this also because of the first question that I answered at the beginning of the video. Yeah, this is a very powerful technique, and finding your listening position by finding the low end sweet spot and then setting up your speakers properly is the most powerful thing you can do in a home studio. And everything else should be secondary to that, everything else. Because if you don't do this right, everything else won't matter. Yeah? So this is why this is so powerful. I teach this completely for free. Again, on my website, you can sign up to it. And if you get this right, everything else starts falling into place. Yeah. So I just wanted to highlight that here because it's often underappreciated just how powerful this technique is, and getting this right is, to the sound that you're getting. Well, good question or good comment. Thank you for that. So let's move on to this one by Morleyvold64 on the interview that I did with John Darko in the part 2. So John Darko's take on speakers and acoustics part 2. And he says, referencing the 27 minutes and 30 seconds mark, it depends on the width of the front baffle. That intrigues me. Can you explain that principle? Yeah, so this was in regards, I believe, to the baffle step. Disclaimer here, I'm not a speaker expert. People know way more about this. Yeah, so I'm just going to point you in the right direction and then do your research. But this is about the baffle step. That's what I want you to research. And basically, depending on the size of the front of the speaker, there will be a certain wavelength that still fits on top of that, if you will, that is still in the same size ballpark as the front of the speaker. And so that energy will be reinforced. If the wavelength is bigger than the front of the speaker, it won't be as reinforced as those shorter wavelengths. And so you get something called the baffle step, where basically you lose some energy because from sort of one frequency to the next. Obviously, it's a more gradual transition, but you lose some energy because at these lower frequencies, these larger wavelengths, the energy isn't reinforced by the size of the front of the speaker. Yeah, and so that's what we're talking about here. Again, research a baffle step, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up here. Some very good questions there. I hope, as always, these helped you out figuring things out in your studio, understanding the details a bit more, clarifying a few things. With that, as always, let's get back to learning to trust our ears and having fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.